Hi, this is the Cat's Library. I'll be a librarian today. This time, I was planning on making one video since the part 1, part 2 of the Snow White video seemed confusing. However, I got to the 7th page of the script and wasn't anywhere done, so this is part 1 of however many this ends up being. This is a pure story video where I actually practice my writing skills instead of just summarizing the fairy tale. I might put up some of my design decisions up on screen, but we'll see. Also, in this version, Beauty's name is Rosette. Engage! Rosette furrowed her brow as her father, Quincy, paced the floor and bit at his knuckles. He was a merchant and owned a respectable company. Rosette sat on the edge of her chair with her back straight, legs crossed in her fancy dress, and with her hands on her knees. Her 6 older sisters were to her right and her 6 older brothers were to the left. Their frivolity from a moment ago faded into somber patience as they all waited for their father to find the courage to say what needed said. Quincy vigorously scratched his arms. Rosette caught his frantic gaze and nodded at him with a sad yet encouraging smile. He took a deep breath. "You've come to the age where I can tell you," he stopped. "Sometimes in life there are certain..." He stopped once again and closed his eyes and blurted, "My last ship was overtaken by pirates, and now I don't have enough money to buy new stock for the foreseeable future." The siblings turned to each other in confusion. Rosette bit her lip and resisted the urge to hug her father until he was finished. He continued, "This means that there will be some significant changes around here, such as letting go of some of the waitstaff, a reduction in overall spending, such as purchase gifts, parties, and new clothes, and the banker has tossed around the idea that we may have to sell one of the houses." There was a general uproar. Rosette couldn't stop herself from wrapping her father in a bear hug as he answered everyone's questions. She felt his rapid heartbeat slow to match hers. He hugged her with one arm since he needed the other one to talk. Over the next year, Rosette was the constant source of optimism for the family. She motivated everyone to do their chores and made it seem like an adventure. Sewing old clothes to make them last longer was beautiful in its way, even if all their old friends avoided them now. Getting up at the crack of dawn to feed the neighbors' chickens was great because chickens were cute. The leaky roof in the attic gave brother number 4 something to fix, and he loved fixing things, and who didn't like being cold and wet? Rosette also got really into gardening and sold flowers, fruits, and vegetables in her own business. She proved surprisingly good at it. After she had sewed all the clothes pockets shut, had accidentally let the chickens out, and had made an even bigger hole in the roof when she had started fixing it. But she was good at gardening and selling produce. Rosette was just successful enough for her father to buy a new shipment of merchandise, in fact. It seemed as if he had finally hit his big break. He planned to travel across the country for a business meeting, since the usual Connagretch and Sinningdom trade partners had taken their business elsewhere, and asked what everyone wanted since he could finally get them all presents. Rosette's sisters asked for fancy dresses and jewelry and other expensive things. Her brothers asked for horses, promotions at the company, and one asked for a dog. A couple brothers were holding the horses' reins as their father said his final goodbyes. Rosette stayed at the back so that she could have the last word. Her siblings internally rolled their eyes at this, but they let it play out. Quincy smiled at Rosette. "You know, daughter of mine, I don't believe that you've asked for a present. Any requests?" Rosette looked around. "No offense, but I don't think that any present that you could give would be better than this beautiful morning." "Ugh," one of the sisters groaned, but then everyone turned to look at who it was, and no one in particular could be singled out. Rosette cleared her throat. "But if you must, I would appreciate if you bought me a rose." Quincy fought the urge to look at the rose bush at the edge of the property. "I assure you that it will be done." He got on the horse and told everyone goodbye again before riding off down the road. It took several months to get to the west coast of Ryume. Quincy got to the dock at the same time as the shipment. The timing was working out for once. It was a beautiful day in late fall. The sky was blue and the seagulls were soaring. There was no wind, and half the crew were resting their arms from rowing the frigate to harbor. The others were slowly starting to carry or pulley the merchandise down to the dock. The new workers who Quincy had hired for the new location were helping load the boxes onto carts and to transport across the country. They made an effort to look busier when Quincy arrived, which was nice. His banker was waiting for him with an accounting book with Quincy's finances, and they talked numbers and prices and assets and liabilities, which wasn't as nice. Some of the exotic food that they'd been counting on had been improperly preserved, and so it wasn't as good of a turnout as it could have been. It was just enough to pay off the debts and break even, but not enough for presents. It was a long journey back home. Winter was fast approaching, and so he took a different path and got hopelessly lost. He passed the same old lady 3 times, even though he was positive he was on the right course. She gave him directions, but after half a day's riding, he ended up deep in a forest which didn't show up anywhere on his map. In the middle of these woods, there was a dilapidated castle. The wind whistled through the trees, and it almost sounded like high-pitched laughter or screaming. Quincy pulled his coat tighter around him as if he could stave off the cold and darkness. In one of the windows, the gleam of candlelight made him catch his breath in his throat. The gate was overgrown with ivy, which had pulled the hinges from the fence enough that Quincy could open the gate wide enough for his almost overworked horse. As he went up to the door of the castle, a multitude of stone statues greeted him, but he didn't look at them. They were all contorted in either terror or confusion. Outside of the house were a multitude of hedges and bushes with wildly out-of-season flowers. He actually felt much warmer as he approached the building, as if summer were within the walls begging to be let out. Quincy shivered. With one hand he held the reins of his horse, which was slowly trying to back away, and he knocked his blue-tinged knuckles against the soft and smooth wood of the door. 3 resounding bangs echoed inside the building. The birds stopped calling and the wind stopped crying. The horse began breathing heavier and shaking. Quincy rubbed his hands. The crescent moon shone like a curved knife in the dark, cutting into the flesh of an innocent rain cloud. Quincy took a step back and began evaluating the facade for signs of a servant's entrance, or a stable, or an especially large window that he could break. The door slammed open, flooding the doorstep with light, but there was no one there. While he was busy looking at that, a monkey in a suit came up behind Quincy and gently pulled the horse's reins from his hands, since he was too shocked to protest. The aroma of good food wafted into the air where it sighed into nothing. He blinked in confusion as his horse vanished around the side of the building, and then tentatively stepped onto the foyer. There were more strange statues inside, which the merchant took the time to notice this time. "Oh, come on, get inside already!" Someone inside whispered, only echoed to sound really loud. "Hello? Is someone there?" asked Quincy. "No, there is no one here." "Thank you for clearing that up. I've been traveling for several days now, and would appreciate very much if you'd let me stay for the night, and partake in some of that delicious food that I smell." "Are you magic? I hate magic. I'm super cursed right now." "No? Although I should probably be asking you that. What with the statues and the monkey and everything. Are you sure no harm will come to me?" "I give you my word as a Ryumite that no harm will come to you on the premises. That is as long as you don't leave any luggage behind or take anything past the property line that you don't come in with." "What if I want to buy something from you?" "No." "Thank you, sir." "Who are you thinking? I told you there's no one here." Quincy elected to ignore this. He had a nice meal in the dining room and then meandered to the nearest empty bedroom. It was a big room with a desk in one corner and a table with 2 lounge chairs on the other. It was the softest bed that he'd ever felt, and he slept in it until noon the next day. Despite this, he had some strange dreams of a fairy woman and a 20-something boy telling him that appearances could be deceiving. When he woke up, there was someone sitting in one of the chairs. The guy was trying to hide behind a brightly colored velvet cloak, but it barely provided any cover. He was on the short side and mildly overweight. His feet were hooves, his nose seemed to be a short trunk, he had 1 bat wing, 1 giant pawed hand, and a rat's tail. The lack of thumbs was contributing to his lack of ability to make the cloak stay in place. Quincy was just wondering how his host got dressed in the morning when the beast roared, "Don't look at me! Don't look at me!" Quincy looked down at the elaborately embroidered bedsheet and tried not to clench his jaw. "Were you just watching me sleep?" "No, I'm not here." "Okay." Since he was already looking at it, Quincy pulled the bedspread off. I slept in my shoes." He turned his face toward the ceiling and called, "Sorry, mysterious owner of the house whom I have never seen." "Thank you," the beast whispered. Quincy went back to the dining room where the best breakfast he'd ever had was waiting for him. After that, he wandered around until he found the stable. His horse was shiny and brushed with a jewel-encrusted feed bag strapped to her face. He tried to move to take the horse out of the stable, but the monkey slapped his hand and took the feed bag off first. There was something very off about that monkey. Quincy led the horse out into the courtyard. They wove around the scarily positioned statues. The merchant stopped at the border between the summer of the grounds and the thickening snow of everywhere else. As he took one last look at the beauty of the place, his gaze caught on the rose bushes, and he remembered his dear daughter's humble request. The rose was unfurled into the sunlight. Water droplets, from where the wind had blown snow across the boundary, glistened across its white surface. Its jagged leaves seemed to reach forward at the same time as Quincy. Just as his fingertips grazed the stem, something bowled him over, away from the foliage. The beast smelled like rotten onions once he was so close. His teeth were a mess of different animal-like fangs strewn together out of order, and altogether impossible to clean properly. The beast tried to bring a fist down again and again on Quincy's head while the rest of his body held the man down. The beast didn't look like he'd noticed the merchant blocking the strikes with his arm, though, and after a while the beast gave a satisfied grunt as if he'd actually done some damage. Quincy didn't notice whether there was any damage either, as he was shaking too hard to know for sure. His fists clenched and unclenched. "Hi!" Quincy squeaked. Are we good? "You tried to steal my Petunia!" "Rose!" "Whatever! Why would you have done that after all I've done for you?" I didn't really get confirmation for the food of the bed either, and I'm incredibly sorry that I did not ask in this particular case. I'll just leave now." He tried to edge his way out of the grapple, but the creature pressed the man's shoulder down and dug in his claws. Quincy winced. I have kids. You don't want that on your conscience. You don't know what I'm like." They both paused for a moment, trying to see who would make the first move. Quincy tensed, trying to prepare himself to fight back. The creature twitched his tail. "So, what do you want the daffodil for?" And partially to stall for time, and partially to plead for his life, Quincy told the beast his whole life story. "How old is Rosette?" I'm 21. "What? Are you making me some sort of offer?" Am I doing what? Wait, don't say this. I've got this." He began muttering absolute nonsense to himself. Quincy furrowed his brow. "Ah!" The beast tried to snap his fingers, except he only had paws, and dug his claws deeper into Quincy's shoulder. Quincy felt a yell rising in his chest, but he stopped it in time for it to become a gasp. "Ah! Yeah! I'll let you go in exchange for one of your daughters. just like to live here for a bit, but only if you explain what's going on and she's cool with it. No sneaky tricks. She doesn't have to do anything that she don't want to do. Quincy's eye twitched. Yes, I will do that, he said through gritted teeth. Just let me go on ahead and explain the situation. The beast nodded. He rested one of his hooves on Quincy's torso to free up his paw. Quincy gasped as the air was knocked out of him. The beast swung his paw around as if he were wagging a disapproving finger. And just remember that if you are back in a month with news one way or the other, then I will find you and burn your house down. Quincy didn't know how to respond to that. The beast gently patted him on the side of the head. Good talk. I'll get out of your hair and then let you get to it then. Quincy lay on the ground breathing heavily long after the beast had left. It was turning out to be an absolutely beautiful morning. The sound of horse hooves and wheels on the path stirred him from his scrambled thoughts. 2 white horses were pulling an elaborately decorated golden carriage decorated in the historic pumpkin style, while his own horse was hitched to the back. A thin gray dog in a lacy shirt was holding the reins. Quincy rolled to his feet. He felt his face grow warmer and his body tense. The carriage had several luggage compartments, and all of them were filled with coins, dresses, and packets of exotic seeds. Inside the car seating area, a single white rose lay on the cushion. His breath became heavier, with a slight growl with each exhale. He stomped over to the edge of the forest, snapped a branch from a dead tree, and then came back and brought it down again and again on the gleaming metal. At first the strikes were slow, tempered, but eventually they grew frantic, fast, forceful. The horses attached to the carriage and the dog didn't react to this, but Quincy's own horse started to shy away. The carriage wasn't even scratched after all of that. He began toppling the crates all over the yard. Treasure fell in the dirt like useless rain, flooding his whole world and taking his daughter away for good measure. He held up the rose as if to tear it in half, but stopped and stared at it in complete stillness. The statues held their collective breath. Quincy swallowed as if he were choking on something, fell to his knees. He took a few calming breaths before he put the dresses and jewels and gold carefully back into the chests, and the chests back into the carriage. He calmed down his horse. He tossed the broken stick into the foliage and rubbed the places that he had hit with his sleeve before climbing inside the carriage. He leaned back in the seat and crossed his arms. So, do I give you directions, or do you just know where I live? The dog snapped the reins and the horses started walking. That clears things up. Every day since her father had left, Rosette went to the edge of their property and waited. She knew it was unreasonable for Quincy to get back at the exact time that she was out there, but the routine felt good. Everything in the harvest had been small and barely edible, and so they were all really depending on some good fortune. Rosette was less and less sure that anything like that would ever come as she waited far past when he had estimated that he would be back. It was cold. Anything could happen in the cold. Many people were economically struggling, since the fairy serotonin had overtaken the monarchy and had raised taxes far too high for anyone's good. Needless to say, there was a bit of a problem with robbery on the roads. Rosette had everything packed to go find her father, but her brothers kept trying to convince her that it was too dangerous. They wanted to wait another week before they started the expedition. She watched the snow fall and wondered if she should just leave on her own, when something shiny and sparkly blazed at the end of the lane. Eventually, Rosette saw the horses trotting forward in their golden harnesses. She glared at them and the carriage up until the point where it pulled up close enough that she could see her dad forcing a smile at her through the window. She pulled the door open before the horses could stop and tackled him in a hug. He pulled her inside and hugged her back. The carriage briefly stopped and then continued on course to the front of the house. Everyone ran out and pelted Quincy with greetings and questions. The dog immediately jumped into the arms of one of the younger boys and began acting like a real dog instead of a coachman. The white horses stayed at militant attention. When Quincy finished his story, everyone went very quiet after their brief exuberance from all of the presents. "You know this is all your fault, Rosette," one of her sisters said. Rosette opened her mouth in indignation, but an argument struck up and anything she had to say would have been drowned out. Some of them wanted her to go to the castle because it was her duty. Others wanted to storm the castle and kill the beast. Quincy was a pacifist and firmly declared that he would have none of that, and so this plan was swiftly changed to locking the beast in the dungeon. One sister wanted all of them to go to the castle since it seemed better than where they had been living, but everyone ignored her. "I'll go," Rosette said quietly, and since everyone was waiting to see what she would say, they all paused in their vocalizations. The horses looked at her and visibly relaxed. Quincy cleared his throat. "We still have a month to come to our final decision. I'll take 3 weeks to set my affairs in order, and then I'll leave at the beginning of the 4th to be on the safe side to be there in time." "It's a 5-minute drive. The horses are magic." "Oh, and I'll leave in 4 weeks then." Quincy did everything to convince her not to go, but she had her mind made up and was almost as stubborn as her mother. In that time, Rosette made sure that the money that the beast had given them was enough to make repairs to the stable and buy food and other necessities. The snow went from heavily coating everything to dissolving into puddles on the ground and crashing from the tree branches. It was at that time, between winter and spring, which was the worst elements of both seasons, that almost absolutely no one likes. Except Rosette. If her love for the season was tempered by her impending doom, nobody had any idea since she ran through the trees the same way that she always did. She convinced several siblings to come with her since she didn't want to leave her family alone for 1 second. They all got incredibly cold and wet and internally mad at her, but they couldn't say anything because she was going through a difficult time. The day before she was going to leave, she got up just after everyone was asleep and took off her shoes to sneak down the stairs. Quincy was sitting in his armchair facing the door and waiting for her. They stared at each other with exhausted resolve for a moment before Quincy gestured at his daughter to leave. She nodded at him and he followed her out the door. When they made a move to hitch the horses to the carriage in the stable, everything magically fell into place. Quincy held out a hand and Rosette gripped it for balance as she stepped inside the car. He pulled himself after her as she found a comfortable place to sit down. The door slammed shut silently behind them and the horses trotted forward, even though the dog didn't show up. It didn't feel like they were moving especially fast, but the scenery outside flashed by so quickly that Rosette couldn't tell where one tree started and where the next one ended. The contrast between the weather of the outside forest and the castle was less severe than when Quincy was last there, as they pulled past the open gate. The sky was illuminated by fireworks. Her father set his hand on Rosette's shoulder as she numbly stared up at the sight. "I heard in town that a Ryumi prince was replaced by a creature as hideous as it was dense," she whispered. Quincy squeezed her shoulder. I think it's gonna be alright." She kicked open the door and stomped out onto the gravel. Quincy scrambled out after her and caught her eye, clearly about to say something. Her eyes were filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she said. He pulled her into a hug for a moment. The fireworks sounded above them and the monkey brought the horses back to the stable. It was a nice moment. Rosette sighed. "Thank you." He squeezed her tighter. "I love you." "I love you too." The front door swung open. They looked at each other and entered inside the building. Rosette winced at a particularly terrified statue by the front steps and entered second. The inside of the castle was pitch black. But as soon as she passed the threshold, every candle spontaneously caught on fire, from the farthest away to the closest to the door. The statues in the entranceway were covered in garlands of flowers and silly hats. At the top of the double staircases was someone holding a portrait of a handsome man between himself and the doorway. "Greetings, Quincy and Rosette! Please make yourself at home." He shook the painting up and down as if he were puppeteering it. Rosette leaned toward her dad. "He doesn't exactly put my mind at ease. Let's go see if we can get a dinner out of this, and then we'll see what I can do."